I guess, Gareth, good morning to you first of all, that the VBS arrests couldn't have come at a better time.
Good morning. Yes, it was a very good time. And of course, it's not going to be enough because there's so much corruption that the NPA and the criminal justice has to get on top of. But certainly it does show that where there's a determined will and effort to hold people accountable for grand corruption, that arrests can be made and prosecutions can start happening. So it was a very good sign. Yes, it's
the prosecutions, isn't it? Because I guess it's easier to arrest somebody than actually getting them into jail and keeping them there.
Absolutely. So we really just started that process. How the case unfolds, when the trials actually start, is when we really start seeing whether the prosecution authority has been able to get on top of the evidence of corruption involving VBS.
South Africans have been so disappointed in the NPA and many of our services that should be getting people into jail. What sort of impact has that had on the working of the NPA if we feel removed from the whole process?
Well, I think we need to understand that the NPA, along with many other institutions, were severely damaged during the former president's term of office. There was a lot of political interference in the independence of the NPA. There was a neglect of its resourcing, so it was severely underfunded compared to many other departments in government. In fact, it had a 20% vacancy rate. Many people who were very skilled prosecutors were either forced out if they were against corruption or left for greener pastures because of the declining morale in the organization. So when the new National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batohi, took over the beginning of last year, she really found an organization that was really struggling. It wasn't completely collapsed. It was certainly able to process around 300,000 cases every year. But certainly the more complex and high-profile cases had been neglected, and there was a declining level of public trust. So it was a huge job to try and stabilize the organization and turn it around, and that process is still ongoing. It's not something that is really newsworthy. It's a slow, day-by-day grind, and it will take time, but we're starting to slowly see improvements. And as the VBS arrests and situation showed us recently, some progress is starting to be made.
Yes, and we must certainly applaud her and those working alongside her for that. But I guess the public should also be told about the onerous legal process, the paperwork and all the nitty-gritty bits that need to get into any sort of case before somebody makes it to court.
I think that is one area where civil society can play a role. It's not to put pressure on the NPA to make decisions one way or another. That is a legal decision based on the facts and the law, and that's obviously where the independence of this organization is so important and must be respected. But certainly it is up to civil society to watch what's happening in the NPA, look at the developments that are taking place so that we can raise the alarm if we think that there are problems that are not being addressed on one hand, but also to be able to explain to the broader public about the complexities of such cases. So we see a commission of inquiry, for example, where lots of allegations are made and people making statements about corruption that they know of, and people then assume that it should be a quick matter for the prosecuting authority to then make sure those people are on the dock. But in fact, that evidence can't just be used in criminal trials. The criminal justice system is a separate entity that has to start from scratch and independently collect evidence against people. And that can take years after the first allegations arise. So, for example, the civil society organizations and also for the NPA do have a role to play in explaining how complex and how difficult it is, especially talking about complex corruption involving millions of rands in different accounts and how fund companies are opened. Because when people are committing this complex fraud and corruption, they don't just steal money as if it's out of a till. You work with very clever accountants and lawyers sometimes in order to set up ways to hide the illegal gains and to cover their tracks. So it does take a lot more work, a lot more skilled and dedicated professionals to get on top of those kinds of crimes.
And I believe Mexico really turned around the impression of something like the NPA, cleaned up many of the services linked to it, and South Africa has adopted a similar model. Talk us through that.
Well, in our policy brief, it was just really to look at another example of where civil society has mobilized, where their office of the Attorney General, their prosecutor, was also seen as not really independent. Similar to what was happening in the past in South Africa, the president was appointing loyalists to key positions, including that of the office of the Attorney General there. And that meant that that person was likely to use their powers selectively. They wouldn't just act according to the law and what the facts were. They might be taking decisions based on other considerations, potentially political considerations. So in Mexico, a coalition of around 300 different civil society organizations was formed to look carefully at what was happening with their prosecuting authority, identify areas where they thought reforms are necessary, do research, educate the public on what they should be expecting from their prosecutors, present the research in different forums, both in Mexico and in South America more broadly. So there's a very active engagement. And of course, when very powerful politicians and powerful business people get prosecuted, one thing they typically do is attack the prosecuting authority. So if they can't answer to the charges specifically, they'll issue broad denials, but what they'll try and do is undermine the credibility of the prosecuting authority itself. They'll attack the prosecutors, they'll attack the judicial system, because they hope that if they undermine the credibility, it'll become more difficult for them to be eventually put in prison. And so civil society also has a role there to stand up and call out unwarranted attacks on prosecuting authorities on one hand. So there are various things that civil society organizations can do to support the reforms of an organization like the NPA and to defend it if it comes under unfair attack.
All right, good getting your thoughts, Gareth. Thank you.